Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I am Sally Clark, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at AFG. AFG is the leading provider of program, project, and construction management services. Today, we are presenting Saving the Day, Successfully Navigating Challenges Before They Lead to Disaster, presented by Doug Selby, a project manager with GSA, and Tom Johnson, project manager with AFG, and our resident historic facility expert. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your go-to meeting control panel, and I'll bring them up towards the end of the presentation, and we'll have time for questions at the end. Also, please remember to mute your phones, and without further ado, we will turn this over to Doug and Tom. Thank you.
Thanks, Sally. Before Tom and I started this project, we got together to do a risk mitigation survey. And we thought we're only going to have 3 subcontractors: masonry, window preservation, and sheet metal by the roofer. And we thought it'd be on cruise control after a month or 2. And we couldn't have been more wrong. It's not going. Okay, learning objectives. First, building a team that fosters partnering. Also identifying schedule issues before they become a problem. Overcoming schedule and budget challenges, utilizing collaboration, and utilize innovation to successfully complete a project. Topics of discussion. First, we'll do a brief project overview. Go over partnering and collaboration at the start of the project, followed by constructive schedule analysis, and methods of innovation and mitigation to mitigate the schedule threats. Project overview. Yates was constructed in 1879. It had additions constructed in 1883, 1895, and 1915. It's listed on National Historic Register, located on National Mall. Contract was $16 million with a 2-year period of performance. Yates team, the owner was General Service Administration, and we had 3 separate contracts. First was with AFG, was the CM. General contractor was Grumley Construction, and the conservator was the John Green Watley Company. The picture on the right is a good portion of the team. A few people couldn't be present when it was taken. And one very interesting statistic that I'm really proud of is 46% of the key personnel are women, 3 of which is what's on the picture to the right. When we started this project, only 1/3 of the key personnel had any experience in 19th century masonry methods, leaving the other 2/3 had to learn it as the project went along. There's the Yates building. To the right is the Holocaust Museum, and to the left is the Washington Monument.
Scaffold phasing plan was directly related to our workflow. Phase 1 was on the right side of the building on the north, and it was the smallest and least damaged area of the Yates building. The phase moved counterclockwise, and as the damage and window restoration increased. The plan was to have 30 masons trained in this area. So we only had 3 masons to start with. And you threw me off step here.
That's okay. We started it in February. We had to tent and heat the area due to the cold temperatures, because we had to maintain temperatures above 40 and not allow any of the mortar to freeze overnight. There's also issues if it got too hot, which we never thought we'd experience in the first section of scaffolding, because the temperatures were approaching in the mid-80s due to the heater was almost too efficient for us, which resulted in us having to remove parts of the wrapping to provide ventilation in there. We started at the north elevation for one reason. I'm really big on risk mitigation, and my risk mitigation began before the procurement even started. The project started before the presidential election inauguration. I don't want to be in a situation where the Secret Service would issue us a stop work order and require us to dismantle all the scaffolding prior to the inauguration, blowing out the budget and the schedule. We worked in a counterclockwise fashion. The north elevation, another reason to start there, it had the least amount of deterioration. And the deterioration progressed as we went across the west and southern elevations. Not doing it again. There we go. Okay, here's some statistics on what we did on the project. We removed and replaced 322 miles of mortar. We're doing the conference in Las Vegas. It would take you 332 miles to drive from the conference to San Diego, as a point of reference how much we did in the project. We did 44 different brick shapes we manufactured and replaced. One of those brick shapes only had 4 brick on the entire building. And we replaced approximately 6,400 masonry units. That's nearly 2,900 over what was stated in the contract documents. And most importantly, we had 0 safety incidents throughout the 2 years. Now, with all my capital projects, I always start with a partnering session before work begins. I don't like generic partnering sessions. I like to have productive partnering sessions. So there's quite a bit of thought that went into this. This project has such a high level of collaboration between the government, the CM, the conservators, and the general contractor. The way masonry work started was the conservator would actually take a piece of chalk and identify a piece of masonry that required restoration work or it had to be removed and replaced. After that was done, it was followed by an AFG representative and somebody from Grunley to quantify the amount for billing purposes, and then the masons would follow behind to make sure they agreed with everything so they were appropriately compensated. So knowing this interaction was required, the first thing I wanted to do was include the subcontractors because we really did work hand in hand with them throughout the project. So we had the owner of the subcontractor there as well as their superintendent. And the first thing we did was define roles and responsibilities, to outline who's responsible for what and what will they be doing. We use that to set expectations.
Well, I got a green button, but I don't need
one.
one.
For quality, communication, interaction with each other, along with many other things. And then we also did action planning. When I say action planning, it's who, what, how. Who's going to do it? What are they going to do it? How are they going to do it? And when are they going to do it? We also put in action planning. If a situation arises, who's responsible at each level and how long do they have to make a decision or respond as appropriate. The picture on the right there, that's masonry that's prepared to have repointing done with it. After it's quantified by everybody, the masons come by. It's a water-based product. They brush it on with a paintbrush. Here it sets until it's dry, and then they can start removing the mortar. We need that because the mortar has a black pigment, and if it comes in contact with the outside of the brick, it will stain the red brick black. And the last thing in the partnering session was developing a mission statement. Mission statement was, as a team, we'll work together to deliver quality product, utilize our strengths as a unique process to increase efficiency, and take pride in the project. Very first thing that started on the project, we had to train the masons. This picture here is a training session that started in the middle of the project, but it's still the same training session. The conservator is in charge of the training. We had 2 conservators, this is one of the 2. Her job was to teach the masons that are going through training, correct mistakes, make suggestions, and answer questions from anybody. Now, because as I stated earlier, so few people had experience in 19th century masonry, also present was the general contractor's historic preservation specialist, the general contractor's quality control manager, as well as the masonry PM and the masonry superintendent. The superintendent did also have some experience in 19th century masonry, so that helped not only the training session, but for him to help his guys out on the scaffolding in addition to the conservator.
Part of our collaboration on the photo on the right is a collaboration of myself, the conservator, the masonry superintendent, GC super, the GC's quality control, and an off-production manager. It's a delivery of the first delivery of brick that we actually brought to the building. Upon our view of these brick, they were all rejected. The last thing that actually the superintendent really wanted to hear was his brick were rejected and were unavailable to be used on the building. These brick were lacking in shape and they were rounded in the corners and were just unfeasible to be used. We actually decided that we would all meet at the off-site facility to see if we could figure out what the cause was for these bricks to actually fail.
Picture on the right is a collaborative session that started after construction started. We instituted a bi-weekly meeting every other Tuesday at 7 a.m. in the morning where the conservator was available, as well as GSA's historic preservation specialist. Also, the AFG was present there, as well as the general contractor. It was an open forum where the subcontractors, if they had any issues, questions, problems, that we would discuss it, come to a workable agreement on the scaffolding and move forward. It was extremely beneficial because we had so many unforeseen conditions, very large ones and small, unique ones. It allowed us to work through those problems. It also suggested methods of innovation where they can do the restoration work quicker. And that's why I was helpful with the conservatory there, as well as GSA Historic Preservation, where they would approve it. Sometimes the meeting would be as short as 15 minutes. Sometimes it lasts 4 hours or more through lunch. Next, we're moving to constructive schedule analysis. First, we're going to discuss early threat identification, and then go into the schedule threat analysis and methods of innovation and mitigation to reduce the threats. First is early threat identification. The first thing Tom and I did when we met together on site before construction started was do a thorough risk analysis. We listed every risk we could think of. We ranked the risk for severity and also the probability of the risk. We also assigned contingencies to each risk so we can address it should it happen. Now, this isn't something we just did just before the project started. We did this continually throughout the project. We constantly, new risks would arise, other risks would be completely mitigated, we'd take them off, we'd adjust contingencies as necessary. And we did this all the way through till we know we're going to complete the project on time. The second early threat identification is also a pre-construction risk. We had an out-of-date design. When I say out-of-date design, the design was completed 4 years prior to procuring the project. At the time the design was done, the building was at its tipping point where the deterioration of the facade was accelerating. Now moving into construction threat identification, starting with the contractor's baseline schedule. After a quick cursory review, we realized we had a problem because the masonry and window durations were essentially the same for each section of scaffolding on all 12 decks of the scaffolding. Problem was, for the masonry, there were some incorrect assumptions also. First incorrect assumption was the damage would be the same throughout the building, regardless of elevation or location on the elevation. So they consider the 12th and 11th deck of scaffolding to have the same amount of deterioration as the second and third decks of scaffolding. And also the north has less exposure, won't have as much damage as the south and west elevations, but despite that, they had all the same durations. And the windows durations were also a problem because the durations were all the same, despite the windows having significantly varying sizes between the windows on the floor. For example, the 5th floor windows were a fraction of the size of the 4th floor windows. And another issue, now moving to construction problems, first was off-site material production. This wasn't included in the baseline schedule because it was an off-site activity that the masons were self-performing in their yard. When actually this should have been on the critical path because they didn't start producing the replacement masonry items until after they started performing the restoration work. In our opinion, it should have been on the critical path because sooner or later, they're going to need the brick to complete the work they're already have started. And second problem was not accounting for the learning curve. During training, the first training session, that's only for 2 skills to be served. Remove mortar and replace it. After that, there's 12 other skills they have to obtain. Not everybody can earn all 14 skills. But when you're done the first training, you go on the job training on the scaffolding, and there's a learning curve just because you're starting with it. You're not going to be producing as if somebody's been doing it for the last 6 to 8 months.
The brick production. The brick production that you see on the right-hand side, this is actually the molds that are used in actually casting our brick. This, if you remember, I talked earlier about the decision that we were going to meet off-premise. This is their off-site facility where they were actually casting the brick. The brick itself is set in the forum to set for 4 days. When we visited the site, we found that after 5 productions of brick through these white cast, that they were actually deteriorating. So we had to figure out if we could a different material and a stronger material, which you see on the right-hand side, is the process of where we are actually starting to cast the different materials, which we'll talk about later. Brick production process itself takes 9 days. To make the mold itself, it's 3 days. The actual brick stayed in the mold for 4 days. It had a curing time that was indoors for a day, and then it was sent out for inspection for a day. Our waste factor as failure rate estimated was 15%.
The first schedule threat we identified was the mason's self-performed brick production. We were concerned that like I said earlier, we were concerned that they had already started masonry work and they didn't begin producing brick. And the big concern was what we call type X brick. It's just what it's noted in the construction documents. It's just your standard rectangular field brick. The construction documents had approximately 2,400 brick to be replaced. And all I did was make a simple formula. I took a casting start date. I just picked a recent date. I take the number of brick, which is 2,400, multiply it by 4 days in the mold, and divide it by the number of molds. And the number of molds, I just chose an arbitrary number of 10 because we didn't know how many they had at the time. Then use a waste factor. Our waste factor, like on the other slide, was 15%, which in the beginning we found out was way, way too low. Their waste factor in the beginning, due to the learning curve, was closer to 60, 70%. Our first projection identified the type X brick wouldn't be completed until approximately 1 year after the contract completion date. Next, we had a problem with the pigment color.
The problem with the pigment was that our manufacturer could not get a color to stand for a long period of time. We had problems with both the red and the black mortar, which affected both brick and the mortar productions. We decided to try to go out to a manufacturer. We looked at different places, but the conservator had an idea to be able to work on this problem out themselves. So they decided to put together some pigmentation and did come up with a color.
Mitigation to solve these problems. First, basically innovated, did some research. Tom and I got together, and we got together with conservators talking about the problems with the white rubber molds. And then with the conservators, we did some research and found out there's varying grades of qualities of rubber, and the cost rises with the higher cost of rubber. So what we did is we met with the general contractor before we talked to the masons. I was showing them their problem with the molds, and it's actually decreasing their performance because they weren't able to produce because they had to keep routinely making molds where they're getting 5 to 7 casts out of mold versus 30 plus a mold. Now, the picture on the right identifies our problems with the pigment. The pink-looking bricks on top was the problem we're having. They couldn't put any more pigment into the brick molds because it was already saturated, and the manufacturer had no idea what the problem was. So, as Tom referenced, we got with the conservators, and they worked with the manufacturer, the pigment, and the manufacturer who actually makes the brick material and come up with an idea of staining them. And what you see on the below the pink bricks, the red ones, that's a staining in progress. That's after the first or second coat of staining. And as a result, well, first you can see the staining on the left now. It's as close to match as we can get with the brick. And it came out pretty good. You'll see the black mortar on the stained areas. The brick on the right with the white, that's a calcium solution that occurs naturally in the area of DC. It's on top of the black mortar. But the results of using,
It's okay.
and will save to 810 days of production in a savings of $875,000. Now, one item I missed the slide before is I asked Tom, because we were really concerned about the staining, where they had to come back 3-4 times to have a schedule delay. I asked Tom, is there somebody in this country who can produce brick that's historic in nature?
And after researching some of my long lost friends and resources, we came up with a small firm that is in Eastern Tennessee that was capable of producing the brick for us, and in fact produced a brick that was flawless and was 100% replication.
And because of that $875,000 in savings dovetails for the difference in cost. Producing a brick with the molds, the labor, and everything, we had a unit cost of $225 per brick. With the stone art brick from the manufacturer of Tennessee, we paid $7.50 a brick, which allowed us to produce an additional 2,100 Type X brick, which was an unforeseen condition and allowed for early finish for brick replacement, as well as no contract extension.
Schedule threat number 2 was a compensatory contractual extension for unforeseen conditions. The unforeseen deteriorated stone of 30 sections of sandstone and 10 sections of brownstone windowsill. This was a scream out loud that this was a deficiency that was going to cause us a major delay. Additional scaffolding cost was basically there to not to be looked upon. But if you look at the slide on the right, on the left, pardon me, L148 and L145, the stones, these were just stones that had been delivered that the contractor had been waiting for 8 weeks. These stones were rejected upon receipt because L148, the color that you see on the bottom is the actual color we were looking for the stone. So this is the reason why we rejected the stone. Mitigation strategy for innovation. We had 2 different types of innovative movements that we did. We actually, with the 30 pieces of stone, we decided that what we would do is remove the stone ahead of time to allow the contractor to get all the stone out of the way so that the brick masons could continue to finish their portion of the brick under the windows. These stones were at least 8 to 12 weeks out. So therefore, if we had the stone out of the way, we could actually get a lot more work done without affecting the schedule. The collaboration effort on this was a joint effort between both the masons and the stone masons, as well as the conservator and share, and the GSA's historic preservationist. We also looked at an idea of taking stone from future phases like phase 7, phase 8, that they were same size, same shape, that we could use in earlier phases where we needed them in phase 4 in order to help reduce our schedule and to keep the masons working continuously. The picture on the right is actually the stone coming out of the wall, but the problem was that there was a restriction of 2 people per bay. So it made it very tight for us to be able to get the stone out, move the stone. These stones are 13 inches wide, 82 inches long, and weigh 750 pounds. Next slide. The result of this was a savings of $800,000+ because we had no additional scaffolding costs and no contract extension by this innovation that we used to be able to work from these stones.
And one thing about the $800,000 in savings, you see the scaffolding on the right. That's 12 decks of scaffolding. The rental costs for that were $4.79 per linear foot per deck. When you multiply that by 12 decks with the length of the scaffolding, usually runs up close to $8,000 a week in additional scaffolding rental charges. Schedule 3 was the windows. This is both a pre-construction and construction threat. Pre-construction, during the pre-bid site visit, there was no means or methods for the window subcontractor to see the windows above the first floor. They could see the first floor and the basement windows, which typically had little to no damage at all. And the problem was the amount of deterioration was unknown because the window scope was only in the drawings. There was no spec section for it. And it was there were 2 notes in the drawings that basically said sand, scrape, prime, paint. And then midway through the project, we had a subcontractor change due to the amount of damage in the windows was above their skill set. The way we overcame this is via collaboration. The south elevation of the building we knew was in bad shape, so we worked on the plan with the general contractor and how can we fix this situation and still complete the project on time. So over Labor Day weekend, the conservators rented a boom lift and performed a window survey of every single window on the south elevation. That ultimately resulted in a significant design package to be issued as a contract modification to Grumley. The problem was the effort was 10 times more or greater than what the contract document stated. We're going into full-blown repairs, replacement of parts, fabricating parts, and things of that nature. So we made a change order package, and we also, the general contractor agreed to submit proposals from 3 different subcontractors who have experience in this type of work, along with qualifications of the people they're proposing. And another thing we came up with is how do we increase productivity by 50%? We calculated if we increased productivity by 50%, we'll be able to complete the work on time without a schedule extension. And that's something we had to collaborate with both the conservators and GSA Historic Preservation about how we increase the productivity and resequencing the work, because we determined to do another method where we have 2 different crews. And also there was an increased GC effort for this. They had a limited number of people as part of the RFP on their site team. So we agreed to include their historic preservation specialists to have a significant bank of hours during a 4-month period to help this out. And what you're seeing in the photo here in the photo 4, these are typical situations of the deterioration of the windows on the back of the building. The results is what you see in the picture right here. We went from a very bad situation to windows that look appropriate, they're done well, and they complement the building rather than detract from it. Collaborating by everybody was GSA, AFG, the contractor, as well as the window subcontractor. It allowed us to finish on time before winter, which was a significant issue because before I started this project, I had no idea in DC, the most humid months of the year were January and February. And the windows had extreme requirements on minimum and maximum amounts of humidity. And it was nearly 80% humidity the whole time, which was the absolute upper level that you couldn't do any work with when it's that humid. And there was also no additional scaffolding costs, so we weren't absorbing that approximately $8,000 a week for scaffolding extensions. And most importantly, there was no contract extension. Now, the final schedule threat is insufficient mason labor force. About halfway through the project, after we started, construction really started ramping up in the district, and it was resulting in a labor shortage, particularly of masons. As a result, when you have a hot construction market, you start losing your employees to other contractors. We were really concerned, Tom and I were really concerned because we were concerned the completion date was jeopardized. We were also concerned that the problem would just be compounded due to cold weather coming. And it was any project, if you have insufficient labor to complete on time, you're going to lose the quality of your work. Now, the schedule analysis we did, we had to subcontract this out because neither Tom nor I had the time to do this. Independently, we both know somebody who does very, very in-depth schedule analysis. And what he does is, first thing he does is he visits the project site where he can walk the scaffolding and observe the work being done. That way he can see if there's any inefficiencies. He asks a lot of questions of us, what the inefficiencies are, where they doing need improvement or don't need improvement. The first step he does after he does that is he takes all the certified payrolls and he figures out the actual amount of hours they spent on a daily basis. Then he also takes the schedule and all the baseline schedule, all the updates, and determines what the schedule has for labor as well as how much is budgeted to the effort. And then he takes that information and makes the first graph. The first graph has the dark blue bars are actual labor units that were spent by the masons. This is derived from the certified payrolls. You don't see the dark blue bars towards the right end because this schedule analysis was completed before any work was performed in those areas. The light blue bars are the hours that are listed in the schedule, and the orange bar is the budgeted labor amounts for them. Now, the first two columns on the left, you don't see the orange bar because there was actually no labor for the masons in those time frames, mainly because we're planning to have a scaffold transition then. Then after the reviewer does that, he starts creating trend lines, and that trend line shows the cumulative actual labor hours, and then he plots it with the budgeted amount. Now, when you go to the far right side of the screen for the month of September there, which is the last orange bar, the cumulative, they're grossly below where they need to be. They really start trending low come in May, which is about 2/3 of the way through. And that's identified by this area here. Over a 4-month period, the masons were 27% below the planned performance through the end of June. That's resulted in a significant drop, which couldn't be overcome by just simply working a few extra hours a day and going on a 6-day work week. So we took the reviewer's findings and met with the general contractor to discuss the situation. That basically the only thing you really can do is add more masons to the project. But that created another problem because it was an additional training effort, and also the unknown was how many masons would make it through training, and also if there would be any attrition as a result. So we worked with Grundy to develop a mitigation plan. We said we'd have no problems training additional masons, and Grundy assured us that the masons that made the training would not be removed from the project till it was over, unless they left the company. And another thing we developed, a strategy we worked with Grundy's superintendent, was co-developing the 3-week look ahead with the contractor.
The photo on the right, on the left. The photo doesn't look, it's a unique situation. This is actually one of the training elements of the masons. What you see on the ground is really not what you would find in a cow field. It's actually black mortar that was in a 5-gallon bucket for 12 months. It has been dumped out onto an absorbent cloth to take the moisture out of it. What's unique about using lime mortar is you put it in damp. So the mason is going to dry this out, put it in the palm of his hand, and then he's going to work it into the wall. What's ironic about this is he's now going to have to hydrate this after he puts it in the wall for 3 days and add water back to it. The hydration is actually a way of condensing the sand and creating a hard surface.
Yeah, after 20 years in construction and 2 years on this project, I still don't get how we can mix mortar, put it in a 5-gallon bucket for a year or more, not have a cure and set up, as long as you don't let it freeze or overheat. You could take it out and use it again just to dry it out, to put it in the wall to wet it. It's just crazy. Results from the schedule mitigation. First, the training session was very fruitful. There's only two of the masons didn't make the cut. The resulting in 11, which they did the bulk of the work, which was the removal and replacement of the mortar. They weren't going into brick replacement, kept the people doing that to do it. But more importantly, co-developing the 3-week look ahead together absolutely increased the productivity by both the masons and conservators, where the conservators would know exactly where they needed to be to chalk every single day, and also where the masons could start working, and that worked out flawlessly. And most importantly, we recovered the lost time as a result. Now, in conclusion, reasons for success on this project, first was partnering. You wouldn't succeed on this project without partnering. I mean, here's another example of partnering. You see Tom's on the scaffold there above the roofing superintendent with one of the conservators. It's an unforeseen condition at the roof on one of the drains in the substrate.
Identifying the threats, looking at the contractor here with the conservator, examining the molds as they're coming out of the bricks as they're coming out of the molds.
Yeah, and the guy in the blue shirt, he's not mad. He always looks like that. Third, collaboration. Again, collaborative effort produced efficiencies, ideas, and methods to overcome schedule threats and budget threats. And here's this is an example, another unforeseen condition is the roofing superintendent with the conservator, where we had two problems. First, the circular hole is where the drain was located, which is not at the low slope of the gutter. And also we had a structural issue with the substrate there.
The final innovations were actually, here we are, we're taking the actual, you can see a picture of what the stone really looked like up close and personal. We had to innovatively take stone out ahead of time and maybe move from one site to another and one phase to another.
And that concludes. Does anybody have any questions?
All right, thank you guys. We appreciate your presentation. So we have a few questions and we'll go through them. One of the questions is, with high collaborative projects, what have you found to be the best way to navigate and keep conversations moving in an efficient way?
Group discussions.
Just communicate. In my opinion, lack of communication is the number one problem for project failure. I mean, I've been on projects where there's like a big fence between the CM and the GC, and the GC just throws something over the fence, hope the CM gets it, throws it back over. That's not how Tom and I operate. It's constant communication. I don't think a single day didn't go by where we weren't in the GC's trailer multiple times a day, both of us.
We involved everybody. We involved both the subcontractors, the GC, our own team, and we made that it was an open book policy.
Great. A second question is, how do you manage collaboration between contractors, subcontractors, stakeholders if one or more is unavailable at the time? For example, if you are unable to reach out to your contractor for a few days, how would you proceed without losing work hours?
Probably.
Well, first, if somebody's disappearing, like going on vacation or something, they either need to be available or I have somebody there that's present that can make the decision.
Mm-hmm.
Or somebody there to talk to. That's another thing. I mean, even if we were taking a day off, if I or Tom did or GC did, everybody was notified. There was no problem.
Great. Are there any other questions? If you have questions, you can be sure to write them in the chat box at the bottom of your GoToMeeting screen. We'll wait a minute, see if anything else comes through. Nope, I think that's all. All right, great. Thank you so much, Doug and Tom, for the presentation. Good luck at the CMAA National Conference. For those of you who don't know, this project, the Yates project, will be receiving the Project of the Year award from the CMA National Committee. This will be AFG's second Project of the Year award. The last award was won in 2014 with the HODA project and Andrew Shipman as lead on that project. So this is going to be a great conference. They present this presentation on October the 16th in the morning on the final day of the conference. So we're looking forward to hearing great things about that. Good luck to Doug, Tom, and the rest of the Yates team. That would be Kai Goodrich, Paul Smirlo, Lee Wynn, Bridget Rogers, and one of our interns, who's no longer with us, and Deja Massey. All right, thank you guys for tuning in, and we look forward to presenting more of these webinars to you in the future.